afraid of it. They're afraid of it. The same mentality as the Inquisitors torturing people. Billy Mitchell, who was a World War I ace, a hero, aviator, shot down, German triplanes and all of that. And so he's a hero, major figure. In 1925, he's busted. He's court-martialed by the Navy. He's still in the military. He had blasphemed. He said that airplanes will be able to sink ships. They'll be able to bomb ships and sink them. And the Navy didn't like that. Impossible, that's blasphemy. And they court-martialed the man for it. Now, finally, he won. He was able, they gave him one chance to demonstrate that it was true. So he said, give me an airplane and a bomb and a boat at anchor. And he didn't miss, Revolution in naval warfare, Uranus and Pisces, is a very concrete expression. Maybe not so important, but it illustrates the larger principle of a reaction of fear in the collective against change, evolution in the larger sense. We don't know what's coming, we can't control it, so we try to kill it, try to stop it. Here's a beauty. 1919, Uranus in Pisces. We passed the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution, a short-lived amendment. Thou shalt not drink alcohol, Prohibition. It's a big success, right? So what was that about? There were cultural change was happening. We're having radio, we're having automobiles letting people move around. There's the suffragettes, the beginning of the liberation of the feminine, all sorts of cultural change happening. And the conservative forces got scared of sin as having a heyday. So, we've got to cool that out, keep them sober, that'll help, So what happened? Prohibition criminalized half of the population of the United States. Half of the population got used to thinking of themselves as criminals, radicals, outsiders, rule breakers. And it created a wonderfully fertile medium for the growth of racial integration, feminine liberation, so-called sexual liberation, God knows, honest writing, jazz, music, all sorts of wonderful things came out of this resistance. If they hadn't resisted with Prohibition, I'm not sure the Roaring Twenties would have roared so loud and been so creative culturally. Okay, so in this, so far, with that last little reference to the Roaring Twenties, we begin to see the dessert. But we also recognize this critical point of fear-driven, violent, conservative reaction to necessary change. Does the idea of fear-driven, violent, conservative reaction to necessary change ring a bell in the light of the newspapers today? Yeah. History teaches us that these forces never win. It's their last gasp, and that they create a reaction against themselves which actually constellates the individuational process in the Uranian side of the equation, that Uranus needs resistance. It requires it. There's a beautiful verse from the Tao Te Ching. It's one of my favorites in the whole spiritual literature of the world. When the wise man hears of the great Tao, he thinks of it constantly. When the average man hears of the great Tao, he gives it a thought from time to time. When the fool hears of the great Tao, he laughs out loud. Without laughter, the great Tao would not be what it is. Isn't that beautiful? We need pig-headed, violent, sadistic resistance to let the Uranian process happen. That's a fierce truth. Okay, now taking this down from the geopolitical level and putting it inside us personally, we'll realize that you have to let go of something. You have to step into the unknown, something good and worthy, something to which you are attached, and not for transparently pathological reasons. It has to be released. And replaced with what? God? God says, God's doing her nails, No lightning bolts, good. Yeah. So a place will arise in you, an inquisitor will arise in you that tries to silence this evolutionary voice, tries to let you stay in the past, tries to let you stay right. I've always been right. Okay, how do we go forward? Now, Pisces is immediately going to correlate with visionary kinds of processes, surrendering kinds of processes. Pisces, being a water sign, is not particularly intellectual. It doesn't mean not intelligent, but its intelligence does not operate in a purely logical way. I am thinking just the example par excellence of this, of course, would be Albert Einstein, who was a Pisces. And Einstein saying, I did not come to my understanding of the fundamental laws of the universe through logical means. Einstein got the theory of relativity one day riding his bike as fast as he could. And he started fantasizing, what if I could ride faster and faster? What if I were a photon? And he felt what the universe would look like at that speed. And then later had to figure out some equations, And that's arguably the greatest intellectual triumph of our species, at least of a single person, is the theory of relativity. But it came as a feeling. It's a classic Piscean kind of thing. I think of Pisces and I immediately link it to visionary creativity. So here are two poets, and they're both in the middle of writing a poem. They're both stuck for the next line. Each of the poets independently are kind of straining and struggling, do the thing that poets do to, like, what's that next line? Where is it going to come from? Each of them pop, and each of them finishes the poem. The first poet is an existentialist. The second poet is a mystic. We go to the existentialist poet and say, what you've been doing, and the existentialist poet says, I wrote this poem. We go to the mystical poet, and the mystical poet says, God gave me this poem. Now, that phrasing, God gave me this poem, can seem a little precious, if somebody at the conference says, I'd like to share something that God personally gave me. It seems a little pretentious, but in a way, it is a more precise statement of the process, because the poet sets up a desire, a hunger, a need, a wish for the next line of the poem, but where does it really come from? I mean, these are interesting Piscean questions. You go crazy really thinking about them. Where do you get your thoughts? Especially your creative thoughts. They don't come from the same place that, balancing your checkbook comes from. It's another place entirely. So all of the artists in every category, any category in history, have been people who have learned how to create an attunement between their conscious selves and the larger self. All artists do that, even if they claim they're existentialists. I picture, here's William Shakespeare in the middle of a play, gazing out the window, wondering what will happen next in the play. Here's Shakespeare just gazing out the window, his eyes kind of unfocused, gazing into the physical distance, but also the psychic distance, being receptive. Okay, cut. Here we have a mystic in the Himalayas, the mouth of a cave, having fasted for 17 days, gazing out into the distance. Check out the eyes in both cases. It's the same eyes. It's the same process. Ego surrendering, parting the veil, letting something come up from the depths. Quintessential Pisces. So you have to let something go, and it scares you. And if you're able to release the fear too, then you enter a visionary, creative process that has to do with downloading uploading, put it whichever way you want, from the universe, from your unconscious, from God, from the source, from your soul, from your, whatever language you like, but from that thing that is bigger than you. Downloading, uploading inspiration and vision for where you're going. Now, if this is true, I believe it is, then everything we have seen so far would suggest that we would find many examples synchronistically of powerful expressions of creative imagination that enter the collective mind as kind of exemplars of human creative brilliance, that these would have arisen. Now watch this. Name a famous painting. Okay, Mona Lisa, right? Mona Lisa. Now, I would not for a second assume that everybody in the room immediately said Mona Lisa, but I would stake my life on the fact that a majority of you, that was the first one that entered. Now, imagine you come from another planet, and you go to the Louvre in Paris, and you've been assigned this task of figuring out what's the most famous painting in the history of this species, And you're going to walk through the Louvre, and what are the chances you're going to hit upon the Mona Lisa? It's a nice painting. I mean, it's a great painting and all this, but think of the way we have been conditioned to pay lip service to the idea that of all paintings in the history of our species, the Mona Lisa is the exemplar. Isn't that a little weird when you stand outside it, I mean, we've been trained that way. And I don't even necessarily think of this as a bad thing. The idea is, let me give you the date. Leonardo da Vinci began painting the Mona Lisa 1503, Uranus in Pisces. There it was. So humanity was ready for an example of the triumph of human creative imagination. And there it was, the Mona Lisa. Now, who's the greatest playwright who ever lived? Okay, here it is again, right? We all know Shakespeare, Mr. Forrest, right? I mean, people who've never read Shakespeare are going to get that question right, Because, in lockstep, Shakespeare is the greatest playwright who ever wrote English, at least. Not to be totally chauvinistic about it. And, I mean, God knows my aim here is not to diss William Shakespeare, but only to point out this completely anti-Uranian, consensual reality, agreement that we should all recognize that Shakespeare is the greatest playwright to ever work. Well, Shakespeare began his writing, with Uranus in Pisces back there, around the same time Leonardo was painting. Michelangelo was called to Rome by Pope Julius II. If you know art history, it's one of the most pivotal moments in the history of Western art. Michelangelo comes to Rome, Uranus in Pisces. 1505, that one. Charles Dickens published his first novel, 1837, Uranus in Pisces. Charles Dickens, who's the greatest novelist in English language? We might not be quite so quick to come up with Dickens, but he'd be on almost everybody's short list. And the less imaginative, educated but not so imaginative that we are, the more likely we're going to put him on there, because we've been trained to think of Dickens' work as the epitome of the English language novel. These themes of creativity, of artistic stimulus, they seem to, they arise at times when humanity is hungry for a vision, and the vision comes through the artists. The vision comes through the creative people. The vision comes to us in the form of metaphor which always points beyond itself to something greater, the thing we can't quite understand, but we hear a story that points to it. We start to feel it inside us in the story, long before we can articulate it in a rigorous way. And this is Pisces, coming up from the psychic depths. How imperative it is that each of us going through significant Uranian stimulus during this period take time to be creative. It's one of the sad things about the world, that we are trained out of our creativity often by the time we're 12. You know, you don't have any talent. The incredible destructiveness of that. This is not about talent. This is about a method to enter into dialogue with your own soul. Not about talent, not about winning a contest, but to let the creative juices flow. Let me extend this into that quintessential Piscean activity that we would call meditation. And meditation is a very delicate subject. Let me say first very simply that with Uranus and Pisces, it behooves us to meditate. And in meditation, we are surrendering and allowing and receiving. That's the very essence of it in principle. But there's a really slippery paradox in meditation. I picture, here's a person in meditation. Here's let me say, a meditation Nazi. And I come up and I kind of disturb this person, and I say, hey, are you meditating? Yeah, meditating, Well, why? Well, to achieve enlightenment, Well, would you teach me to meditate? I'd like